Hello, and welcome to the Life Report, conversations about our journey through God's epic story. I'm Matt Anderson.
I'm Ben DiBono.
And I'm Sarah Hyde.
Once again back with us.
Hey, Sarah, thanks for being here again.
You're welcome.
So we are pre-recording this episode. We're recording it the same day that we did our episode about taking scripture out of context.
Literally moments after. And it will either be a bonus episode one week or a Matt and Ben didn't have time to record an episode this week.
I think that's the most likely scenario,
I don't
seeing as
know.
how holidays are coming up.
Yeah. But you never know. We
Actually-
tend to see each other quite a bit.
Just one holiday. We just finished Thanksgiving, so...
Yes. Happy Thanksgiving, Matt and Sarah.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving to
Did you guys have
also.
good Thanksgivings?
It's great.
You have to say that because your mom might listen.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Now she's going to question me. Thank
Hi,
you.
Sarah's mom. Happy Thanksgiving.
She probably doesn't know how to listen to it.
No.
Oh, that's sad. Well, Ben, since we are doing this immediately after our last episode, and we don't have any... Well, we do have a little bit of feedback from our listeners later in the episode, but I know that you had a few more things you wanted to say about taking scripture out of context.
Yeah, unfortunately, we were running a bit long, so we weren't able to get to our a couple things. First, some tips for staying in context, and what I wanted to encourage our listeners there with is to keep studying the Bible and to make that a priority in your life, not because it's an end in and of itself, but because as you learn more, the more you learn, the more you're going to be able to not take Scripture out of context, and the more careful you're going to be able to be with that. But I'm curious if you guys have any other thoughts on, some good tips for people who are saying, whoa, I've been taking Scripture out of context left and right. What do I do?
Well, I would say you don't necessarily have to feel bad about it because if you
you do.
don't listen to Ben because
No.
he's really rude.
Yeah, on the show, he's always the
Rude?
meanest.
He's rude on and off the show.
Yeah.
Off?
Anyway,
I feel so insulted. Who invited you back on the show?
well, number one, I would never left my seat between these episodes.
That's true. Okay, wait, Sarah had a good point she was making. Go ahead, Sarah. Sorry for my
About me
co-host.
being rude?
No, you
Oh,
were being
about-
rude about
yeah.
my point that
okay.
you don't have to feel bad if you think you've taken scripture out of context because if you don't know about it, then you don't really know that you're taking it out of context, and it's really easy to. And also, listening to people taking it out of context, you can go educate yourself after you think that you have heard something out of context.
Yeah, and so if you think you're in danger of taking scripture out of context, let the Life Report be a lamp unto your feet.
Exactly.
We'll just listen to our last episode about that, and Ben gave 5 points about how things could be taken out of context.
Yeah. I think the only thing other I'd say is it's true. Don't feel bad, and I agree with that, especially if it's just an issue that you don't know as much. But ignorance is not bliss when it comes to biblical knowledge.
As opposed to what they say on The Matrix.
Yes, and other places too. I'm pretty sure that's not original to The Matrix,
Oh,
but maybe it's the only place you've ever heard it.
possibly.
Possibly. We should do a bonus show sometime on The Matrix.
We have a lot of ideas for bonus
Yeah,
shows.
you should write them down.
Sarah, do you have any other ideas you'd like to talk about besides Bible-related things?
At the risk of being made fun of, we could do a Twilight Saga.
Oh, no.
Episode.
No.
Oh, boy.
I will do it, and people who choose to listen to it.
That would kind of
Listen
fit,
to
though,
it.
with our sci-fi podcast that we're keep talking about.
Just think, if we had this equipment last year, we could have done Lost podcast.
No kidding.
Man,
I like
Or
Lost
even this
Report, it's
summer.
fine.
We could have done Firefly when we were watching that.
I know.
A little less relevant since it's 8 years old, but still.
Okay, sorry.
So-
sorry, everybody. Back to the scripture
Yeah,
context.
I thought what might be fun to do is in this bonus episode is one of the main things we didn't get to in the last episode was a whole bunch of examples of taking scripture out of context, and I wanted to kind of go through those a little bit.
Okay, no, is this before we get into translations, which
Yeah.
is the topic of our...
That's our main topic, but this is kind of the bonus round for
Okay.
out of context that we're going to
Okay.
do first. So, my favorite example, and this is going to shock the world and make everyone feel bad.
Great.
1 Corinthians 13 is constantly taken out of context.
The love chapter.
The love chapter. Love is patient. Love is kind. It takes no record of wrong. And we read this all the time at weddings.
That's true.
And anytime it's read at a wedding, it is being taken way out of context.
Elaborate.
Well, would you like to elaborate, Sarah? Because we already had this discussion earlier.
Right out. I bumped the tray. I wasn't supposed to.
That's okay.
I don't really Oh, wait. It was being talked about with spiritual gifts, like speaking in tongues.
That's my daughter coming through upstairs.
That's okay. So go ahead.
Do you want me to yell upstairs?
No, let's not.
Okay.
Am I right?
You are right.
Talking about spiritual gifts?
Yeah, chapter 12 is all about spiritual gifts and about the structure of the church. So Paul's talking about different gifts that are in the church. He's talking about the order of importance of those gifts. And then he says, this is how the church should be run in terms of specific order and hierarchy. But I will show you an even better way. And then he starts talking about love. So Paul's argument in 1 Corinthians 13 has absolutely nothing to do with romantic love or marriage.
Let me ask you this, though. Even though it's not necessarily about marriage that he's referring, in the sense that he's referring to it, isn't it universal that love is patient, that love is kind? Can't we take that and say, he might have been talking about spiritual gifts in this case, but love does have these qualities.
But isn't that the whole point of Scripture and context? That your point might be true, but that's not what the passage is about. The passage is about church unity.
But are you saying that God can't multitask with his words? Can it mean more than one thing?
There are places where Scripture has multiple meanings, but what I'm saying is that in no way does the topic of romantic love fit with the passage. It just doesn't.
I guess what I would say, and I haven't really studied this as much as you have probably, but what I would say is I think it's universal. So even if he's talking about one thing, actually, in this sense, I think it's safe to say that every pastor in the history of the world that's ever used it at a wedding hasn't been wrong in referring to this new marriage relationship in this context.
But there are different types of love in Scripture.
True. But what does that have to do with love being patient?
Romantic
kind?
love would be eros. And I'm pretty sure that when Paul's talking about church unity, he's not talking about erotic love.
Okay, so let me ask you something. Do you think that one of the qualities of love is patience?
Yes, but again,
Do you think?
but no. But this is the point. Is that your point is true. It's true that love is that way
Right.
for everyone, but that is not the context of the passage.
is he
It goes
taking it-
against the context, which is the very definition of out of context.
But is he taking it out of context if it is true? I mean, are you saying that God can't use words in such a way that that this chapter was fashioned for one thing, but now we can apply it to something else?
He does do that, but that's not the issue of application. The issue of application is saying Paul's talking to the Corinthian church, and he's talking about the issue of speaking in tongues. And now we're having this issue over whether or not to buy a building in our church. And so we can apply the principle of church unity to that specific application, which is different than their application, but the principle is the same in the context. If you add in
Okay.
an additional principle, just about done, that is called eisegesis, not exegesis. That is imposing your view onto the text rather than taking what is there.
You brought up a good point, and so I want to bring this up. You said that he wrote to the Corinthian church.
Yes.
But we read it and apply it to our own lives. So aren't we then, in fact, taking it out of context by applying these words that he wrote to somebody else?
No.
Because I think what you might be saying is that this letter to that church can be used universally to other people within the body of the church. So, therefore, I think that it's safe to say that in the same way that the letter can universally be applied to the church body, that certain words that are true, because all truth is God's truth, love can be those things, even if it's not the exact type of love that he was talking about.
No, because there's a huge difference between what you're talking about and the issue of application. Application says Paul is teaching a specific principle about church unity in this passage. And therefore we can apply that in any situation where church unity is needed. It's entirely different to say Paul's talking about church unity and we're going to use that to talk about romantic love, which is in no way implied in the passage. It is not part of the context whatsoever. Huge difference between application and eisegesis.
So let me
now,
ask
you're
you-
right, but you're right that all truth is God's truth. You're right about that, but that part of the truth about marriage is not in that passage of Scripture. It's elsewhere, but it's not there.
So let me ask you something. Are you saying it's wrong to apply that in a marriage setting?
I'm saying that I'm not going to get too bent out of shape about it. in terms of like
Seems like you might be.
well, on the life report, what I'm saying is that if, for example, if I was performing a wedding for somebody someday, and they said, we want 1 Corinthians 13, I'd probably encourage them to choose a different passage.
But if you are saying that it is applicable to a marriage romantic
not
relation,
saying that.
I'm asking you, is it? Do you believe that
No,
it is?
I
You
do
don't
not.
believe that those qualities do encompass what should be inside a marriage?
I do believe they do, and I believe that's not what Paul is talking about.
But okay, fine. He's not talking about it in that case, but you can still apply the words of Scripture.
But the context of the passage, which is what we're talking about, is not marriage. And there's no way you can say that it is.
I think I agree with you on the whole idea of taking things out of context, but I also think that God is an awesome multitasker with his words and that there are layers of meanings within Scripture.
You're going down a really dangerous road there, because it's fine when we're talking about a wedding, but what about when we're talking about a bigger issue about salvation?
know
Well,
that-
God's not really talking about salvation.
But wait, let me say
there.
something. You already said earlier that in other parts of the Bible, these qualifications or these descriptions of love are mentioned. So it's not like from out of nowhere that we would apply these things.
So why
to
not
love.
use the other passages then?
Yeah, why not? I mean, we could, but why does it hurt to use these?
Because it's not the context of the passage. Whereas something like the Ecclesiastes verse about a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken, another famous wedding verse, that's perfect. It's talking about how you need God and you need a companion in your life. It's talking about companionship. The context of that works, and the same principles come through in that passage as they do in the love passage.
I'm going to wrap this conversation up by saying I think it's fine to use it at a wedding.
And I disagree, but I love the debate.
Good job, Ben. Sarah? Hey,
What do you think, Sarah? Are you going to use 1 Corinthians 13 at your future wedding?
Not if you perform it.
good point.
I guess that means I won't be performing it.
I think we should move on. What other examples do you
Another
have?
example. That was fun. A great example we can all agree on that really helps us see this.
Don't be so
Hopefully.
sure.
Yeah, no kidding.
No, we'll agree on this one because it's about Satan. Matthew 4.
Okay.
Jesus' temptation in the wilderness. How does Satan tempt Jesus?
How does he tempt him?
Yes.
First, well, he basically just tries to make Jesus use his power.
But what method does he
Use
use?
the
for
scripture.
Oh.
Thank you. Out of context.
Oopsie daisy. Scripture. Good job, Sarah.
What's the topic of today again,
No,
Matt?
that's not the topic. Today's
Oh,
topic
yes.
is translations.
Yes. So,
He doesn't know that.
I got too into the 1 Corinthians 13 one. So if you're looking for a good example of what taking scripture out of context looks like, I'd say Satan's a pretty good
Yeah.
model to go by.
A good model of what not to do.
Exactly.
Good. Okay, Ben, I can agree on that.